For decades, the story of Ricky Nelson's tragic death has lingered like a haunting melody, one that never truly found its final verse. The beloved teen idol, who captured the hearts of millions in the 1950s and 60s, seemed to have it all: fame, fortune, and a voice that defined a generation. But behind the perfect smile and polished image, Ricky's life was a whirlwind of pressure, heartbreak, and secrets that few ever knew. When his plane went down on that cold New Year's Eve in 1985, killing him and his band, the tragedy sent shockwaves through the music world. The official explanation seemed simple: a fire on board, a tragic accident. But over the years, questions refused to fade. Eyewitnesses, investigators, and even family members whispered conflicting stories. Was it mechanical failure, a hidden fault, or something darker? A truth buried beneath layers of denial and silence. Now, decades later, new details and long-suppressed testimonies have finally surfaced, revealing what really happened to Ricky Nelson in his final hours. And before he became a mystery, Ricky Nelson was a miracle of American pop culture. Born into a showbiz dynasty, the youngest son of Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, Ricky practically grew up in front of the camera. His boyish charm, angelic face, and effortless voice made him an instant favorite on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. But what began as a wholesome family act soon became something much heavier. By the age of 17, Ricky was no longer just a TV son, he was a rock and roll star. His hit songs, Hello Mary Lou and Travelin' Man, cemented his place alongside Elvis and Buddy Holly. Teenage girls screamed his name. Record sales soared, and the world saw him as the all-American dream come true. Yet those closest to him knew fame came with a cost. Behind the charming smile, Ricky was struggling. The same fame that made him a star also trapped him. He once confessed to a friend, "I don't know who I am without the cameras." Every performance, every interview, every appearance was curated. The perfect son, the gentle star, the image America adored. But inside, Ricky was crumbling under expectations he never asked for. When rock music evolved in the late 1960s, Ricky tried to reinvent himself, moving toward country rock, a sound more true to his soul. But audiences didn't want the new Ricky. They wanted the teenager from TV. One night, when he performed new material at Madison Square Garden, the crowd booed him. That moment broke something in him. He later wrote the haunting song, Garden Party, a bittersweet reflection on rejection and identity. "You can't please everyone," he sang, "so you've got to please yourself." It was a message wrapped in melody, but it came from real pain. In private, Ricky's life was unraveling. His marriage to Kristen Harmon, once considered Hollywood's perfect match, grew toxic amid accusations of infidelity and substance abuse. Friends recalled endless fights, custody battles, and emotional exhaustion. "He loved his kids more than anything," said one close friend, but he was lost. He just wanted peace. That search for peace pushed Ricky back onto the road. Touring gave him purpose again, a way to connect with fans who still remembered the boy who once sang about love and heartbreak. But the tours were grueling, and the money wasn't what it used to be. His bandmates later admitted that the planes they traveled in were barely holding together. Still, Ricky pressed on, a man chasing his past, haunted by fame and desperate for freedom. His family begged him to slow down, but he refused. "Performing is the only time I feel alive," he told his daughter Tracy. In late December 1985, Ricky boarded a DC-3 aircraft with his fiancée, Helen Blair, and his band. They were headed to Dallas for a New Year's Eve show, one last performance to close out the year. The flight seemed routine, and Ricky was in good spirits. But somewhere over Texas, something went terribly wrong. What happened next would spark decades of speculation, controversy, and heartbreak. The smiling boy America grew up with would soon be gone, and the story of his death would become one of rock and roll's most haunting mysteries. It was December 31st, 1985, date meant to end with music, laughter, and celebration. Ricky Nelson and his band were heading from Guntersville, Alabama, to Dallas, Texas, where they were scheduled to perform a New Year's Eve concert. The mood at takeoff was upbeat. Ricky, his fiancée Helen Blair, and the 6 members of his band boarded a vintage DC-3 aircraft, a twin-engine plane built in the 1940s. It wasn't glamorous, but it was nostalgic, fitting for a man who had built his fame on a classic sound. But beneath that charm was a troubling truth. The DC-3 was an aging relic. Mechanics had warned Ricky several times that the aircraft was unsafe. The plane had a long, checkered history, once used for cargo, later modified for passenger use, and its electrical systems were notorious for shorting out. He loved that plane, a former crew member recalled. It made him feel like a cowboy of the skies. But it was a risk, and everyone knew it. The band took off just after 5 p.m. Everything seemed normal as the plane climbed into the crisp winter air. Witnesses later said it flew smoothly for nearly an hour before things began to go wrong. Somewhere near DeKalb, Texas, the pilot reported smoke in the cabin. Moments later, flames were seen trailing from the fuselage. A farmer working nearby looked up and saw the glowing shape descending through the trees. It was like a ball of fire, he said later. You could hear the engine sputter and then nothing. The DC-3 slammed into a cow pasture, bursting into flames on impact. The wreckage scattered across the field, and by the time rescuers arrived, the plane was fully engulfed. Ricky Nelson, Helen Blair, and all 6 band members were killed instantly. Only the 2 pilots survived, barely, suffering severe burns as they crawled from the wreck. The initial shock was overwhelming. News broke across television screens before midnight. Ricky Nelson dead in plane crash. Fans couldn't believe it. It felt impossible. The boy who grew up on America's TV screens gone in an instant. Tributes poured in from every corner of the world. Elvis Presley's former bandmates wept on live radio. Country stars stopped their shows to honor him, but soon questions began to surface. What caused the fire? Why did it spread so fast? And how could 2 pilots survive when everyone else perished? The official investigation pointed to a fire in the cabin area, possibly caused by a malfunction in the plane's heating system. But almost immediately, rumors began swirling. Rumors that something far darker had taken place. The pilots claimed they heard popping sounds before the fire began, suggesting that someone might have been smoking on board. Others whispered that a freebasing cocaine setup had ignited, a claim that would follow Ricky's name for years, despite lack of proof. Friends and family were furious. Ricky didn't deserve that kind of story, said his brother David Nelson. He was a musician, a father, and a man trying to rebuild his life, not a criminal. Still, the speculation wouldn't stop. Tabloids painted lurid tales of drug use and recklessness, overshadowing the tragedy with scandal. Even decades later, the question lingered. What really happened on that plane? When investigators revisited the case years later, newly examined evidence suggested the original report may have been wrong, that the cause of the fire wasn't drugs, but something far more tragic and preventable. The truth was still hidden beneath smoke and rumor, but the first cracks in the official story had begun to show, and what they would uncover next would forever change how the world remembered Ricky Nelson's final moments. In the weeks after Ricky Nelson's death, the world demanded answers. Fans wanted closure, and his family wanted the truth. But what they got instead was confusion, contradiction, and controversy. The official explanation, that the plane's cabin heater caught fire, sounded simple enough, yet many who knew the DC-3 model found that hard to believe. That heater had been replaced and inspected, one mechanic said later. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't just explode out of nowhere. Then came the rumor that would haunt Ricky's legacy for decades. That he and his band were freebasing cocaine during the flight, and that the fire started when someone's equipment ignited. The claims spread like wildfire across news networks and tabloids. Overnight, Ricky's reputation went from beloved rock idol to reckless has-been. His family was devastated. His daughter Tracy Nelson later recalled how painful it was to hear those stories. They turned my father's death into gossip. There was no proof, no evidence, just ugly speculation. He didn't deserve that. Privately, even investigators began to doubt the freebasing theory. When the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, released its report months later, it confirmed that no drug paraphernalia was found in the wreckage. Yet the rumor persisted, fueled by the fact that the 2 surviving pilots were eager to shift blame away from themselves. One of those pilots, Ken Ferguson, was interviewed by federal agents multiple times. Each time his story changed slightly. At first, he claimed the fire started near the heater. Later, he suggested someone might have been doing something in the cabin. By his third interview, he was certain it wasn't mechanical failure. Investigators noted the inconsistencies but didn't push further. The case was closed quickly. Too quickly, according to many insiders. Years later, a retired NTSB engineer named Tom McIntyre spoke out in a rare interview. He had been part of the investigation and claimed crucial details were left out of the official record. That plane wasn't maintained. Said, that's all it would take to ignite the entire cabin. The most shocking part came next. According to McIntyre, the pilots were aware of the issue but decided to fly anyway. They wanted to make the gig, he said. They knew Ricky didn't like canceling shows. In 1996, over a decade after the crash, a journalist from Rolling Stone obtained a series of previously sealed documents from the investigation. Among them was a handwritten statement by one of the surviving pilots. The note, never released to the public, included a chilling line. I knew we shouldn't have taken that plane. The wiring under the floor was sparking when we took off. I told them we'd be fine. That sentence confirmed what many suspected all along, that negligence, not drugs, had killed Ricky Nelson. The so-called drug theory was likely a convenient way to divert blame from mechanical failure and human error. For years, Ricky's family fought to clear his name. Finally, in 2000, the NTSB quietly amended its official findings, removing any reference to drug-related activity. There was no press release, no apology, just a silent correction in the record. Still, the damage had been done. The lies had shaped the public's perception for years, but behind closed doors, one of the men involved in the original investigation finally confessed to Ricky's brother before his death, a confession that would reveal the hidden truth about what really happened that night. And that confession, long buried in silence, would change everything the world thought it knew about Ricky Nelson's final flight. By the time the new millennium arrived, Ricky Nelson had been gone for nearly 15 years. His songs still played on oldies radio, his face still appeared on nostalgic TV specials, but the shadow over his name remained. The crash that took his life was still whispered about, with judgment and uncertainty. A cruel injustice to a man who had spent his final years fighting to rebuild his career and reputation. Then, in 2005, a stunning revelation emerged, one that finally connected all the missing pieces of the puzzle. A retired FAA official named Harold Beckman, who had supervised part of the investigation back in 1986, broke his silence in a taped interview. His voice, shaky but clear, told a story that no one in the public had ever heard. They didn't want to blame the plane, Beckman said. They wanted to protect the charter company. If we'd written that the aircraft wasn't airworthy, the lawsuits would have bankrupted them. So they let the rumor about Ricky start circulating instead. Beckman went on to explain that pressure came from high places, insurance companies, the aircraft's owner, and even entertainment lawyers representing the tour promoters. The official cause of the fire had been quietly rewritten before the final report was released. We were told to keep it vague, he admitted. The line about a possible cabin heater issue was a compromise, enough to sound technical, but not enough to point fingers. That single decision destroyed a man's legacy. For decades, tabloids and gossip columns ran with the idea that Ricky Nelson's recklessness had caused the tragedy. It was easier to sell headlines about drugs and scandal than one about faulty maintenance and greed. But the truth, buried under bureaucratic layers, was that the plane had been an accident waiting to happen. Former mechanics came forward later to say that the aircraft had wiring issues and fuel leaks for months before the crash. One even claimed he refused to sign off on it for commercial use, but someone else approved it anyway. Ricky's daughter, Tracy Nelson, was heartbroken when she heard Beckman's confession. It was never about drugs, she said in an interview years later. It was about money. My father's life was worth less than the cost of admitting fault, and she was right. Behind closed doors, the investigation was all about protecting business interests. The company that owned the plane, Century Air, had already been under scrutiny for safety violations. If they'd been officially blamed, they would have lost their certification overnight. So, according to Beckman, someone up the chain suggested that the pilot's statements about possible drug use be mentioned, not as fact, but as suspicion. And once that rumor hit the press, there was no turning back. For Ricky Nelson, a man who had lived much of his life under public scrutiny, it was the final and cruelest twist of fate. He had survived the pressure of child stardom, the collapse of rock's early era, and the personal demons that fame brought, only to have his death misrepresented to the world. Years later, as the truth surfaced, even the pilots' families admitted they carried guilt. One widow revealed that her husband, one of the survivors, told her before he died, "Ricky wasn't to blame. We were." Today, fans continue to visit Ricky's grave in Los Angeles, leaving flowers, guitar picks, and handwritten notes. On the anniversary of his death, someone often leaves a small card that reads, "The world may have taken decades to learn the real story, but the truth about Ricky Nelson, the kind, humble artist behind the fame, finally found its way to the surface." The tragedy wasn't that he died in a plane crash. The real tragedy was how long it took for the world to understand what truly happened that night, and how many people worked to make sure it stayed hidden.